Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you here this morning to the Pennsylvania Farm Links Farm Succession Workshop. And also, I would like to introduce David Marrison, our first speaker today. He is giving us an overview on farm succession planning. He has served as a field specialist in farm management and as the interim director of the Farm Financial Management and Policy Institute at Ohio State Extension since November 1st, 2022. He's also worked for Ohio University since 1997. And he also has a farm family background, being raised on a dairy farm in Ohio and currently having his own meat goat operation on his own family farm. So we welcome David Marrison today and thank him for joining us.
Good morning to each of you. I get to lead us off with talking about basically the overview of farm succession planning, management transition, and planning a little bit for the unexpected. And then I think I really appreciate how the agenda has been put together to really focus on the financial side that Phil Taylor will be visiting with you, as well as the communication aspect that Darlene's going to talk about this afternoon, and then some of the legal nuts and bolts. Just as a precursor here, this is an educational session. It's not any legal or tax advice. And I know all of the speakers, we will encourage you to seek out legal advice from your attorneys with your specific questions. And we have a great OSU Ag and Resource Law program, Peggy Kirkhall and Robert Moore, that have helped to put some of this together. And just if you want to not jot down a note, if you want access to any of our Ohio State University materials when it comes to farm transition, estate planning, of course, we know that all of the folks across the country have their good extension stuff, but you can just go to farmoffice.osu.edu, farmoffice.osu.edu. So start with this farm succession planning. And this has been near and dear to my heart back to growing up on a dairy farm in Northeast Ohio, mainly because I saw how our family transition did not go so well. And that transition, even to this day, there are my uncles who have not spoken since 1996 over what happened during my grandfather's succession on the farm. So farm succession planning basically is the process by which the ownership and the management of the family business are transferred to the next generation. Now, you might hear me interchange the word transition with succession. I believe the words mean the same thing depending on what state you're in. You'll hear some states talk about succession, where others will talk about transition. I was brainstorming one day about all the things that you would have to think about when you get into this topic. And then I made this little elephant word art. So those are some of the words that come to my mind when we think of this topic. Of course, estate planning and farm succession, but family communication, the goal setting, the big word dysfunctionality, ohana, sweat equity, prenuptial, in-laws, heirs, wills, trusts, fair versus equal, getting your affairs in order, the farm communication, all those words come to my mind. And I put it in the shape of the elephant on purpose. And that's mainly because what is going to derail you is not that there are not good financial tools, that there are not good estate planning tools, that there are not good transition planning tools. What's really going to derail your plans are the elephants in the room, those things which your family is not willing to discuss. Some people will call those undiscussables. Some of those will be the elephants in the room. Well, what elephants in the room might there be that you're going to have to overcome as a family? And I'll touch on those briefly at towards the end of this presentation. Of course, estate planning, this is why we all come to these workshops, right? We want to know how we get the assets from ourselves to our beneficiaries, to our heirs, in a manner which we don't lose some of those to the estate taxes. So the farm estate planning basically is how to get those assets distributed upon the death of the principal operator. And there's just a kind of a matrix that we use. But knowing there is a plan, there's a way to get those assets to the next generation, to your heirs, in a variety of manners. And any cookie cutter approach is not something that you want to go after, because every farm is unique and individual in the way that the family operates, as well as the asset base that we have. So there is no cookie cutter approach. You may be a will-based plan that would roll through probate to your beneficiaries. It could be through the TODs and PODs, those transferable death and payable on death. Maybe it's the survivorships, the rights of survivorships and the insurances. Or it could be rolling through a trust, or it could be used in the use of a business entity to get your assets to the next generation. And I believe you have this afternoon, you'll be talking more about those kind of tools. As far as business survival, only 13% of the successful family businesses last through 3 generations, and then less than 2/3 or 66% survive the second generation. However, we know that farming is unique. Last night at the program I talked about, there were 2 7th generation farmers sitting in the room. We understand because we are tied so closely to the farmland that we do have a better success rate when it comes to those farm transitions. But it's important that we do this planning like you're going through today. So why don't farm families plan better for the transition of their farm? It's a question that I ask at every meeting. I usually would go around the room and do this in this hybrid format. Probably won't do that today, but want to share some of the common responses that you might write down on your paper of why farm families, what has prevented you from planning, maybe what has prevented your neighbors from planning. And we get to those, when I look at these, the typical reasons for this delayed planning. First, we just don't have time as farmers. We're busy. We're busy doing the production aspects of our farms. We're very, very busy, even in the wintertime, it seems like, there used to be a slower time. No, a lot of the planning functions that we're doing, purchasing supplies and inputs for the upcoming season. If you're like our farm, the busiest time in our farm operation starts on Saturday. And that's because that's when all the does are ready to start kidding. That is our kidding season starts. So our busiest time is going to be here as we roll out of the month of February into March. And secondly, it's uncomfortable to talk about death. I know that we just had Ash Wednesday yesterday. We're moving into the Easter season. I would challenge you want to liven up your Easter dinner. I say this tongue in cheek, actually. If you want to liven up that Easter dinner this year, talk about your impending death and about what's going to happen to the farm after you pass away. Better yet, if you're the in-law, bring that conversation up at the in-laws dinner table. It's just not an easy topic to talk about, uncomfortable to talk about death. And sometimes this transition in estate planning work that we do, it might lead to family conflict because we might not have the same ideas on how the farm should be passed from one generation to the next. A lot of times the planning is stopped because we don't know what or how to do it. And that's the beauty of today's program. You're going to have more tools in the toolbox after today to talk about the processes and the procedures that you would go through to get this farm succession and your estate plan in order. And some might say that lawyers are expensive. And I would say, maybe I would challenge back on that, saying you might lose more because you didn't engage a lawyer along the way. So sometimes we can take care of a lot of problems that might be out there in the future by just engaging with a good agriculture attorney. And maybe we don't agree on what should happen. So maybe as a husband and wife, we're sitting in the room today or we're online here, and maybe we just don't 100% agree on what should happen, maybe how we would split it between our heirs, who may be some other benefactors that we want to leave and bless some of our assets with. So maybe we don't agree. And because we don't agree, we choose to do nothing. Or it could be some other reason that you might have of what has been delaying your planning. I look at this planning as a 3-legged stool. Not a 2-legged stool, not a 1-legged stool. This is transition planning or farm succession planning is a very important part. Of course, the other side of that is the estate planning and just the tools, whatever mechanisms that you'll use with your ag attorney to transfer those assets. But I think that stool, that leg right there in the middle, the family dynamics, that's the leg that's going to cause the most wobbling when you sit down on that stool. It is so critical to evaluate and look at how the family dynamics are going to play into this transition. So does anybody know who this is? I'll put it up on the screen. Did I hear someone say?
Dear Abby.
Dear Abby, you're right. It's Dear Abby. A lot of times folks will say, oh, that's Ann Landers. Well, Ann Landers and Dear Abby were actually twin sisters. Of course, I grew up in the age of getting the daily newspaper and sitting there and reading the Dear Abby column that is there. Invariably, when I go into a kitchen and have a kitchen table meeting with farm families, invariably there is a Dear Abby or an Ann Landers column that might have been put up on the refrigerator for people to see. Well, that, of course, wasn't her name. She picked Dear Abby, Abigail Van Buren. Her favorite biblical female was Abigail. Her favorite president was Van Buren. So that's how she got Abigail Van Buren. I often wonder, like, how many people actually had Martin Van Buren as their favorite president, right? But sometimes I feel like in farm succession, I feel like Dear David, Dear OSU Extension, Dear Extension for Dear Abby. And that's kind of how I'd like to step through this morning, working together through some of these Dear Abby type of questions. And here's some of the examples of some of the different articles that I've seen as I've gone through some boxes. Even in our house, as I was going through my grandma and grandpa stuff, just reviewing some of those articles. So I encourage you, if you have a Dear Extension, if you have a Dear Abby type of farm succession kind of scenario or question that you have, I would love, I'm going to write a book someday with all the questions that we've received about the families that are out there. In fact, my goal, my search through life is to find a farm family that exhibited more dysfunctionality than the one that I grew up in, the one that I saw the farm succession play out. So if you have any of those, I'd encourage you to drop me an email sometime. All right, so I'm going to go through, I know that you'll talk about this afternoon, but just to give you the biggest question that we get first is about, will I lose my farm to estate taxes? I mean, that always comes out. So I'm just addressing, and I know you'll go more in depth here later today about that. Well, as we look at the federal estate tax briefly, 12.92 million. So if you roughly estimate that up to 13 million, each of us that are in this program today, each of us can transfer $13 million to the next generation without subject to federal estate tax. So that's our estate and our gift tax limitation. As a couple, that's $26 million. So if your estate is less than that, the federal estate taxes becomes less of a item that would keep you up at night. Now, with all things, when it comes to the political arena, we know that we always have to keep watch on that. So in 2026, because of the Tax Cuts and Job Act, in 2026, that limit goes back to $5 million per person indexed with inflation. So if you look at $5.5 million per person, essentially as a married couple, we can leave $11 million worth of assets to the next generation without it being subject to federal estate tax. Now, of course, with your Pennsylvania, I'm not aware of the Pennsylvania state estate tax rules. So, of course, you have to think about that. But we have to remember in the back of our mind, we're always watching this because you don't have to go too far back, which was 2009 when this estate tax limit was $1 million per person. 2010, it went unlimited. But think about if the estate taxes went back to $1 million per person, or even $2 million per person, how many of our farms would be subject to federal estate tax if those limitations were in place? So something I would always encourage you to do is stay close to those advocacy groups, those political groups that are fighting on our behalf when it comes to the federal estate tax side. And of course, I already showed this slide just as a way and this is where the attorney part of the program will talk about some of those mechanisms to get to the next generation. We do, if you're interested, and I can send this over to Darlene so she can send it out via email to you, but we use a Getting Your Farm and Family Affairs in Order. One of the most critical things that you'll need to do, and I know Phil will touch on this as the financial part of this, to have a good balance sheet put together so you know what your asset base is. An attorney is going to need to see your entire asset portfolio as they help you go through this process. One of the things that we have is a 37-page document that's Getting Your Farm and Family Affairs in Order. And in this handout, we allow you to summarize all those statements that are coming in the mail. So everything that you own, whether it's a deed on a piece of property, if it's a financial account, an IRA account, if you have a life insurance policy, all those things need to be accessible so that as you look at your estate plan, you know what that valuation is. And even more critical is that you need to see how those are titled. Upon your death, what happens to those assets? And each asset that you have, whether it's financial or maybe a physical asset like a car or a truck or land, how is it titled and who's it going to go to in the next generation? Well, this document is it's a PDF writable, so we encourage people to update it every year with the valuations of the different accounts that they have. You'll notice on the right-hand side of that slide picture is a notebook. Encourage you to grab a big notebook. You get the protective sheets and you start compiling all these things. For instance, you'll see there on the left-hand side, it's flipped upside down, but that is my birth certificate. So I actually have a section where all the birth certificates, death certificates, and all the other decrees like a marriage decree or divorce decree would be put in there. On the right-hand side, you can see where that page is flipped open. That is actually the title to the vehicle that I drive. So putting all those things into place so you have it in one area. Nothing's worse than, as an executor of an estate, is not knowing where those documents are. So I encourage you to pull as you go through this process, and it's going to be a process because it takes time. Start pulling those and developing a notebook out, because when someone passes away, that is a really tough emotional time. It's so much easier go grab the book. If you were to go grab my book today, all my end of life directives, advanced directives are in there, the power of attorneys, the living will, and then my will, and then my trust documents. They're all in that notebook with all the financial information as well as all the contacts. So if you would like a copy of that, I'll send it to Darlene. If not, you can email me direct and I'd be happy to send that to you. And here's just kind of a look of what's in it, a quick look, the family information, the estate plan document. So that's where an attorney will start with each of you to do the power of attorney for the medical, financial power of attorneys, the living wills, funeral instructions, letter of instructions, if there are any prenuptial agreements, and then the whole financial section, all those things that Phil or Rob are going to talk about when it comes to the financial section, they're there. And then, of course, your assets, all the titles for anything that is titled, that it's in there, as well as those personal items that are not titled would be important to look at. And then, of course, all the farm inventory, all the different things that you might have in there, from land rental agreements. For us in Northeast Ohio, the oil and gas lease documentations are pretty important. So we know what those leases are that are on there, any easements, if there's any type of preservation preservation type of things that have happened, like easement, conservation easements, of course, you would need all that documentation, as well as all those partnership agreements that you might have, whether it's an LLC, a corporation, or if it's just a simple partnership. And then there's some miscellaneous items in there as well. So what are my goals for the future of the farm? And this is the very first question that each of us needs to answer. So here is a Dear OSU Extension. We have a small 20 cow beef farm and we have 3 children. Who should we leave the farm to? In my case, it was my grandfather had a small 50 cow grazing dairy, has 3 boys. Who should he leave the farm to? So when people ask, well, who should I leave this farm to? And again, if we were all in person, I would ask the question, how would you answer this question? And I think when it gets right down to it, there's not an answer to this question. There's just questions that need to be asked to the person about, okay, you have a small 20 cow beef farm, maybe a couple 100 acres. You can start to think about some of the questions that would be flowing through your mind, right? Well, you might say, well, which kid has stayed on the farm? Which one has the most interest in the farm? But bottom line, it comes back to the very first question that you have to answer. Each of us has to answer about the farm, or what are the goals for the future for the farm? So I put it in this context. If you were to pass away today and you came back 20 years from now, what would your desire be for the farm? Would you want to see an operating farm? I would probably think most of us do. Is your goal that someone in the family bloodline, per Stirpes, someone in the family bloodline would be running or operating that farm? Or is your goal through this transition and estate planning process, is it to treat the children equally? And there's a big difference between the word fairly and equally, and we'll go through that here in a minute. But what are your goals for the future of the farm? I will tell you, my grandfather's goal for the dairy farm, which started our farm, was that it would pass from male generation to male generation to male generation. And yeah, some people would take pause for that, but that was my grandfather's goal. So it did go from my grandfather to my father. And then when my father passed away, of course, it went to my mom, and then my mom gifted the farm to me. The problem with grandpa's goal is it can't be my goal because I have two daughters. I don't have a son, so it can't go from male generation to the male generation. So what is your goal for the farm? I would tell you, I own my grandfather's dairy farm in Ashtabula County, Ohio. And I will tell you, my goal for the farm, quite simply, is to leave it to the person or persons who will be the best caretaker of that property in honor of the hard work that my grandfather and my father did. So notice when I say I'm going to leave it to the person or persons who will be the best caretaker, I said nothing about bloodline, because for me, ultimately, the goal for that farm is someone who will manage that resource to the best, because it was a blessing to all of us to be on the farm, and who will that farm be a blessing in the future? So you start with that goal on the farm. Second thing that you need to talk about and identify is who are your heirs. Quite simply, this could be your kids. It could be your spouse. It could be your brothers and sisters. It could be cousins. It could be aunts and uncles. It could be a brother from another mother. It could be another farmer. It could be a civic group. It could be an agricultural organization. I'm always surprised in the number of farms that are left to the Ohio State University for research farms. It could be left to conservation groups. So who are your heirs? Could be a church, could be a community group. When you think about this, just have discussion with all the things that you own. Who would you like to bless with those assets that you own? And make a list of those. Then the next question is, what involvement do my heirs desire? And have you asked your children or your heirs? And most typically we'll say that heirs are children, right? But what involvement do your heirs desire in the farm? And I would add another question to that is, have you asked your heirs about what their desire for their future of their farm is? I remember sitting with a farmer in Northeast Ohio, and he was despondent that his son did not want to come back to take over the family sheep farm. And he looked at me and said, David, I don't know what to do because my son doesn't want to come back to the farm. So, of course, you know that I pondered that for a few seconds. And then my question back to him was, okay, your son doesn't want to come back to the farm, but do you have other children? And he said, oh, yeah, I have a daughter, but she lives down near Columbus, and there's no way she'd want to farm. So I challenged him a little bit to have a conversation with his daughter about, well, maybe your daughter might want to come back. So how about you ask her? Well, long story short, he asked his daughter about what her involvement or desire to be involved in the farm would be in the future. And she was ecstatic that her dad had asked that question. And as you go there today, what happened was she and her husband quit their jobs in Columbus, Ohio, moved back to Northeast Ohio. And now if you were to stop in and visit with the farm, she and her husband are running the farm, and actually they are employing her parents as some of their employees on the farm to help. So it was a completely role reversal. And of course, would that have ever happened if they hadn't taken the time to actually seek out and ask what the desire was for their daughter when the son said he didn't want to be part of the farm? And what type of farm am I leaving? So this is going to be where I love the fact that you're going to go deeply into the financials, because what kind of farm are you leaving? I have a list of questions, and that will tie into Phil's presentation about what kind of financial shape is the farm? How are the physical assets of the farm? What type of farm am I actually leaving that next generation to take over? And then ultimately there you can see my quote on my desire for the future of our farm is who or whom will be the best take cares of the farm and the land that I was entrusted with. So that's kind of my motto when it comes to my estate planning goals. So I would encourage you to get your vision and what you would see as your vision for the farm for the future as a family. Write that down and then use that as your guiding principle as you're going forward with your farm estate plan. So here's some questions, and again, I think you'll talk about the financial side of this a little bit more in the next presentation. But what is the current financial position and viability of the farm? Take a real good hard look at the balance sheets, look at the strengths and weaknesses of the financial position of the farm. And then I think more importantly, I think one of the things that we're so hesitant as mom and dad, grandma and grandpa of the farm is to share that the financial position. Number one, have we even stopped and shared the tax return to show the income and the expenses that are there on a typical year for our farm? I know the tax return doesn't show us everything, so to go a little more in depth in the balance sheet, the cash flow statements, showing the next generation about the potential or the financial position of the farm. And one of those discussions is, as they come back, does the farm generate enough income for multiple generations to be on the farm at the same time? And in some of our small farm situations, that's not going to be the possibility. I grew up on a 50 cow dairy farm. Back when I was making the decision of what to do with my career, the net income per cow was $500 per cow per year. So if you think about it, if a 50 cow dairy making $500 per cow per year before we make our principal payments, right, and take our family withdrawal, that's making $25,000 for the farm. Is that enough? Is that enough income for 2 generations? And the answer in our case was absolutely not. But in that situation, well, maybe the farm management is not being handed down right from one generation to the next. Maybe there's an opportunity that farm should skip a generation and go from the grandparent generation to the grandchild generation. Or if there is, as we're looking for the future, maybe there is some untapped income potential on our farm that we could tap into that would generate enough income for multiple generations, especially in the day and age when we have a lot of our children that might be interested in the farm. They have all farm income in their startup years where they might be coming back and transitioning some of the farm to that generation. They might not need the income because of their income that they're generating from their day job. So what do they actually need to draw? And are you having a conversation about that? And then what would a SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, what would that analysis reveal? So as you're going through this process, I would encourage you to look at what are the strengths of our farm. I have to write them down. And that could be production strength, could be financial strengths, could be human resource strength as far as dealing with employees. It could be our strengths as far as our facilities and the land resources that we have. So, and then on the flip side, looking at the weaknesses, what are some things if I had an advisory team come in, what would they want us to shore up? What would be some things that they would challenge us to work on to strengthen the business? So those are internal factors. And then you look to flip to the opportunities and threats. So those are the opportunities that might exist out there for future income. I'm thinking some of you, because of where you're at, there's the Pittsburgh market that might be an opportunity for some direct marketing opportunities. But we also understand the threats when we're close to an urban area, that the threat is some of our farm ground that might be subject to some type of land development. So an opportunity is being able to have income streams from the urban population, but the threat is the urban population. Each of us are a threat to one another if we're in the same kind of business and we're marketing the same type of product. But there's also an opportunity for us to work together to build income for both of our farms. And what does the current and future organization structure look like? How is the farm operated? How will it be structured when you're bringing back in the next generation? I have a slide here, a couple slides from now to talk about the future organization structure. And then, of course, if we're going to be working together, can we get along? So I've seen families where mom and dad should not work with son or daughter. I've seen families where brothers should not be farming with a brother. So the hard look is if we are going to work together, can we get along? And then, of course, as you're doing this transition, going to the future, what is the involvement with the non-farming heirs? What involvement will the non-farming heirs have in the farm in the future? In some estate planning tools, there may be joint ownership of land between brothers and sisters, and only one of those siblings might be the one that is actually operating the farm. And are your children going to be able to work together if they're owning land, say maybe through like a mechanism, like a business structure, like an LLC or a corporation? Will they be able to work together in the future if you put them into that situation? So there's kind of it's quite simply, all you do is put 4 quadrants on a piece of paper and start to list those strengths, those weaknesses, those opportunities and threats. And I would encourage you to do this. This is a sheet that I stole from our friends at Farm Credit, but actually in their book, they talk about operations calendar. So as you're looking through the year, putting together an operations calendar with crop production, livestock production, the marketing, the finances, and the strategic development about what are the major things that are going on each month, because this then becomes your guide almost as you go through about some of the important things that you need to help train up that next generation as they start to take over the farm. And that will lead us into what's your plan for developing the next owner operator or owner landlord. And I like to separate it into two areas here, the owner operator or the owner landlord, because I think, especially I know in the eastern side of Ohio, and this should be and may be the case in the state of Pennsylvania, is what kind of heir, where will they fit? Will they be an owner operator or an owner landlord? So let's take a little bit closer look at this. So here's the question that ultimately I get asked is, Grandpa still makes all the decisions for the farm and it's worked fine for all these years and there's no need to change. So how long are you back in the operation before you get the chance to start leading, start managing the farm? For some people, they may be back in the farm for 40, 50, 60 years before they're even able to make a management decision. And of course, I would not advocate for that. There should be a plan and a procedure in place to start to hand over some of the management to the next generation. So if you think about the owner operator, this is growing up on the hip of your parent. And this is where you're teaching the next generation to run the physical operation as a farmer. So we challenge you. It's the winter time, right? And farmers have nothing to do. Why not you write down everything that you do on the farm? And I say that tongue in cheek again, because I know we're so busy. But if you had to write down a job description on yourself as the farm manager for the things that you do on that farm on a day-to-day basis, could you write your own job description of the things that you're doing? Because then that opens up the door to what you need to teach the next generation. So when I think of a farm, typical farm operation, I think of the livestock and crop production management. So this is what we do. We raise animals, we raise crops. So in our family, we're raising these meat goats. So what are all the production management tools that I need to know to raise those meat goats? And on the crop production side, when we're making hay, what are all the crop production things I need to do with soil fertility, how to make dry hay, how to sell that hay? That's all the livestock and crop production management. Of course, marketing the commodities, how do we sell it? Very different depending on the commodity that you're raising. How do you market those commodities? And are you training the next generation so that they know how to market those commodities? The financial and tax management, and developing the financial and tax management skills of the next generation. So all those statements, the cash flow statements, balance sheet, income statements, all the things Phil's going to talk about. Does the next generation know what those statements are and then know how to understand those? And then into the tax management, you flow into the Schedule F as a farm. Do you understand how the income and the expenses are tracked on that Schedule F? Do you understand depreciation and all the different things that you can do with accelerated forms of depreciation, recapturing the costs that you have? And then the facilities, machinery, and infrastructure. This was the area of the farm that I least like on a small dairy farm is keeping machinery, old machinery, in good repair. So what are the things that you need to do to keep the facilities, the machinery, and the basic infrastructure of the farm up and running and in good shape? And then employees, if you're hiring employees, who manage those? How do you negotiate through the hiring process? How do you negotiate through all of the employee type of reviews and all the compliance things that you need to do with an employee? And then finally, the risk management side of the business. As you look at farm insurance, as you look at federal farm program enrollment, are you taking the opportunity to teach the next generation about all those things? So that's the owner operator. But then you might be in a family and you say, well, I've asked my kids and none of them actually want to be a farmer. They don't want to farm. They have wonderful jobs, but they all would love to own the land and to have that as part of a place that they can escape. They love the farm. They may want to come back to the farm. Where I live in Coshocton County now, there's so many that just appreciate how they grew up. And they may want to come back to the farm. They want to come back on a couple weekends to hunt. They want to put a cabin there. They want to come back and de-stress from life there on the farm. So can they own that farm in the future? Absolutely. Are they going to operate the farm as a farm, whether it's raising beef cows, meat goats, raising hay, raising corn, soybean, whatever it may be? Are they going to do that? No, but then I would put them into the role of owner, landlord. So owner, landlord is the fact that you're training them up how to be a landlord, because that farm is going to be farmed by somebody in the community. So how do you teach them to be the best landlord that they can possibly be? So when I think of that landlord-tenant relationship, I think about the things that you would need to know. Number one, they need to know how to vet out different farmers and who should be the farmer that's farming the ground, which would include how do I write up and negotiate a lease agreement. I'm thinking they have to be wise enough to be able to know how to read a soil test, and what kind of conservation practices that should and shouldn't be used on the farm. You definitely don't want the farmer that you're renting the ground to come in and mine the equity out of the soil and not put the needed pH amendments on there, whether it be lime. You want them to put the fertilizer that it's need to keep that soil in good condition. You want those practices that are best for the environment. So do they know what all of those are, and do they know how to communicate those expectations to their tenant farmers? Of course, they need to know financial and tax management. They have to be able to manage. This is going to be potential income stream for them for the future. So they need to know the tax implications. So no, they don't need to know what a Schedule F is, but they sure need to know what a Form 4835 and what a Schedule E is, because that's where they're going to be reporting their rental income, and then the ins and outs of that tax management. And then the risk management, how to have crop insurance, also know if there's any involvement in the farm might have in the federal farm program, how does that roll into them as a landlord, or maybe it doesn't. And then how do they keep the facilities, machinery, and infrastructure up in good repair? So if you think about developing the next skills, this is your job, right? As the senior generation, your job is to train them either to be a really good owner operator, or to be training them to be an owner landlord. Now, if we were sitting together with the next generation, here's some of the questions that I would ask the next generation to have them start thinking about their future in the farm. And these are questions, if you're the senior generation in the room, I'd encourage you to some of these questions that you can ask as you're having conversations, instead of talking about the weather and politics and religion and all the things that could start arguments in the family. Talk about some of these things, or give these for self-reflection for the next generation. Exactly how did I get there? What's my path? What's the history? What does it mean? What would it mean? So ask the children, what would it mean for me to own or work in this family business of ours? And then think about those relationships. What are those relationships that matter to me? What are those ones that are important for me to maintain in my career? What do I want to do for my professional life? What's my potential? And then what are your concerns with the regards to the future of the farm? So the next slide is 4 questions that I would, mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, these are the questions I would ask, because this is going to help you as you develop a plan to school up the next generation to take over. And if you're the younger generation that's sitting here on this call, or the younger generation who is thinking about taking over, how would you answer these? So mom and dad, ask these to you, the next gen, these are the questions you need to think about. If you had to take over the farm today, what would you be the most concerned about? So what are the things that you don't know that you need to know so that you feel more comfortable? Because the goal of all of us is that there is great joy for running that farm. So what do they need to overcome were the concerns? When my dad passed away, there were some things. My dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and we had 7 weeks to basically learn everything that we could from dad about the farm. Some of those things that I didn't even know, because I never paid attention, was like, where are actually the property boundaries? We knifed anhydrous, and ammonia anhydrous, one of the most dangerous ways to apply nitrogen, of course, to corn crop. But it was what the nitrogen source that was available in our community. But again, it's dangerous. So that was something that dad always did because of the danger of it. So if I had to reflect on what are some things that I was most concerned about, or right away, is I need to learn how to do this anhydrous ammonia application and feel comfortable about doing that. For some, it may mean that I have no clue about the fiscal side of this whole financial side of the farm, and I need help. I need to learn about that. So think about what would be the most concerned about, and then parents, you can use that as a guiding roadmap for you to be able to train the next generation. The next generation, what changes need to be made for you to have a continued interest in the business? For some, they may say, I love to grow up on the dairy farm, but I don't want to milk cows. I might want to take it a whole different way. So what are some changes that need to be made? It could be organization structure. It could be what commodities that we raise. It may be on how we market the commodities that we currently raise. And then to have an insight on what are some weaknesses that need to be addressed. And are there training opportunities through programs like today? Are there other trainings that they could take at night? I'm thinking of the fiscal side. Maybe it's a son or daughter takes a Quicken or QuickBooks or some type of financial accounting type of training so that they feel more skilled to be able to do the financial work. If it's weaknesses when it comes to some of the production stuff, as far as raising the animals or the crops, well, then there's a whole host of workshops I know that our friends at Penn State put on that you can get your kids to, so they can learn some of these and overcome the weaknesses. And then what's the expectation for appropriate time for management control to be transferred? To have that conversation, to be thinking about that management control and when it should to be transferred. And of course, you'd rather this transition for management control happen over staggered times, like in a set pattern, little by little. Every year, a little more of that management control is transferred. So we have some sheets that we use, and I just show this as there's just some questions here. These are the questions we would ask. What's the goal of the family farm? What would you be the most concerned about? The changes, the weaknesses, and the expectation for the management control. So if you want any of these kind of worksheets, we have those worksheets, but it's basically taking those questions and then putting them into action where some people can do some self-reflection on that. So some of my tips for the transition management to the next generation. If you're thinking about bringing a son or daughter back to the farm, I think it's so very important that they get outside perspective, because if you always do what you always done, will you ever learn some new things that could really take your farm up a notch? So employment in another business before returning home is a great idea. Plus, if they make mistakes, wouldn't it be better if they're making some mistakes on somebody else's dime? and they're cutting their teeth in somebody else's business. But I think the most important thing that they can do is that they're bringing some great ideas back to the home business. Have clear job descriptions and identify those responsibilities that we have. I know this is a strong weakness for many of our farms. We just do what we do. There's no job description. But think about if you're thinking about really developing that next generation. One of the coolest farms that I've seen was they had when the sons and the cousins were coming back to the farm was to have job descriptions. Okay, we want you to have the ability to do everything on this farm. So we're going to start you on job description A. Once you've accomplished that and you've become proficient in that job description area, we're going to review it. And then we're going to promote you to a different job description. So through time, you're strategically learning different aspects of the business through job descriptions, through reviews, and then you're moving them up. So you increase the responsibilities as their abilities develop. You can also tie this into transfer of the physical assets, the assets of the business. For instance, there could be a plan in place that after you've accomplished X amount of job descriptions and you've completed them and you keep moving up, and then there's some longevity in the game. So maybe there's 3 or 4 or 5 years being back on the farm. At that time, if you've done some of these job descriptions, you've put in the hard work, at that time, there could be equity positions in the business that are then gifted to the next generation as you start to transfer some of the assets. Also, it's an opportunity 3 or 4 years down the road, maybe mom and dad start to gift some of the LLCs shares to the business, or depending on how your business structure is. But at the same time, maybe the son or daughter starts to use their own equity to buy some of the equity, the shares of the corporation or the LLC, whatever it may be, to be able to buy into the business. So they're not only getting rewarded for longevity and becoming a better part of the management team, but also they have a chance to buy in. So I would encourage you to let your successors have their own enterprises. If they want to try something new, give it to them and let them do it completely 100% on their own and just be their support mechanism behind the scenes. And embrace the idea of sharing ideas with cash flows, budgets, and business plans. I really appreciate when folks take the next generation with them to go sit down and meet with someone like Phil when they're going through the cash flows and the budgets, that it's just not mom and dad who go visit with the ag lender or the farm service agency office or other providers, that you're actually starting to make that transition where they have a relationship with those advisors, and that the children are always not at home working, because someday they're going to have to be the primary point of contact for those advisors and lenders. And of course, give them some feedback as well. I don't know what your organization structure looks like. I think it's really good for you to draw that out on a piece of paper. What is your way that your farm runs? As you look at through the bottom of the slides, small may not be simple, depending on how Dan and Nancy as 50-50 partners look. Are they, if you're 50-50 partners, which are you? If it's a 50-50 partnership between dad and, say, their daughter, who gets to make the decision when they tie basically 50-50? Do we revert back to the parental roles that the parental, in other words, honor thy parents, so then the parent always gets to flip or break the tie? Are you the type of structure is the my way structure, where I call that the me-centric, right? The world revolves around me. Now, I think of a farm in Ohio where dad ruled the roost. Even after he had a stroke and he was confined to a wheelchair, he gave the marching orders for everybody in the operation for every day. No one else got to think about anything. They were just basically told what to do from the dad. And the dad recently passed away. And I can tell you the farm is in turmoil because the brother and brother-in-law and some of the grandchildren that are involved in this dairy farm they don't know how to operate with one another because the me part of that organization structure was gone. Of course, I'm work for the university, so we're more formal, but maybe you have more of a consent basis type of operation where you see our way, which is on the right. But I would encourage you to think about the organization structure that you have now. And then what do you want that organization structure to look like in the future? And again, you can draw that out. That's some of the worksheets that we use. The one on the right is, can you write down the general list of the primary job responsibilities? Who's the shared responsibility and who's your backup? So you can see that I grabbed that out of the farm credit workbook, the production or operations, labor management, marketing, financial risk management. What are the different job responsibilities that are on the farm? Who's the primary person for them, and then who's your backup? I think of a winery in Northeast Ohio that during COVID, this is a multifaceted business, but the brother-in-law got COVID and passed away pretty quickly. Well, he was in charge of all the retail accounts and wholesale accounts of selling the wine to grocery stores and different farm markets and restaurants. Well, all of that stuff was in his head. He was the person. It was all up in his brain. They had no backup. So now they've spent the last 2 years trying to recover from that, to reestablish all those contacts, to try to figure out everything that was in his head that was never written down, and there was no backup. So think about who's the plan B, C, and D. Yes, you may have the primary role and responsibility in the farm, i.e., let's say I'm in charge of all the finances. Well, that's great. So maybe that's mom, maybe that's grandma. Maybe that's one of the sons or daughters that does the finances, but who is your backup? Who's behind the scenes is going to be the backup. So in case something happens to you, they're able to step in. Someone's able to step in. And I use these 2 tips for transition management. The first is tips for transition management is the 365-day approach. Parents, teach your children one thing a day that they don't know about how to operate the farm. I know it sounds simple, but one thing a day. And then at the end of the year, they have 365 new things in their toolbox, management tools that they didn't know from the past. So after a year, at least they have 365 new tools. And if I'm the son or daughter that's back in the business, I should be asking a question a day of something that I don't know, I don't understand. So in turn, we can take 365, divide it by 2, and then we're in the 700s of the things that we learn, all the things that we need to learn to operate that farm in the future. If we take it year by year, 365 things a year, after a 4 or 5 year stretch, there's a lot of things that you've taught your kids. Or you can use the possum approach. Possum approach is that you just simply play dead. You simply play dead. You think about the busiest time in your farm operation and you take a vacation and you leave the next generation there to figure it out over those next 2 weeks. Now, again, I have to warn you on that, right? Don't do that if you don't think that they're ready. But it's a great experience to take some targeted leaves as the senior managers, take some targeted leaves, 2 weeks, and then give that responsibility to where the next generation gets to feel what it's like to run the farm with you not there. And then make plans for the unexpected. Mom and dad have passed. My dad is dating a younger woman. I'm scared of him getting remarried. Will my dream of owning this farm be crushed? Help. So you think about all the things that could go wrong. And then basically it's having the ability to overcome those. We talked about death, divorce, second marriages. We understand and can appreciate that about 50% of our marriages end in success, which means 50% of our marriages might end in a divorce, which means that we're going to have this interplay of divorce and second marriages that might creep into the business. So how are we going to overcome those? Disability, we are a dangerous occupation. What happens if someone gets hurt? Long-term care. The average nursing home stay might be 3 years. So how are you going to overcome and pay for the nursing home care cost? which could be $200,000, $300,000 if you look at that 2 to 3 year period. So are you going to self-insure on that? Are you actually going to look for some long-term care insurance? Lack of retirement accounts. I know Phil's going to talk about this, but Social Security now, if you're living on $70,000 to $75,000, is maybe only going to, if your average, going to pay for about a half of what you need for retirement. So where are you going to get your retirement accounts from? And then buying out the business partner. What if you're in partnership and your brother walks in one day and says, I want to sell out. I want you to buy my half of the business. And we're in a litigious society. So what happens if a lawsuit comes up? And then we have all these things, global issues. It used to be something I just put on the list here, but global issues, a worldwide pandemic, a trade war with China. Now we have the Ukraine-Russia conflict. All those things are impacting us at the farm level. So how is your ability to manage these type of risks? Have you thought about what would you do if some of these things happened? My parents have just told me that the farm will be split between myself and siblings when I die. Is this fair? P.S. I'm the only one who helps out on the farm. Should heirs be treated equally in an unequal situation? So I would challenge you to think about the difference between being fair versus equal. This is Robert, who has a $2.1 million farm he's involved with, 7 brothers and sisters. If mom and dad pass away, 2.1 divided by 7 is $300,000. So if their goal is to treat all the children equally, then the goal was accomplished. They split the farm between the 7 of them. They each get $300,000, and that's how that is done. But if their goal was that the farm be maintained for multiple generations, and they want that farm to succeed, could Robert, at the age of 60, 65, could he come up with $1.8 million to buy out his brothers and sisters? And in this case, I can tell you he didn't have the equity. He couldn't get the loan. So that farm is being farmed it is being farmed right now, but it's not by Robert. It's by nobody in the family because they had to sell it. So can you, through your estate plan, be fair to Robert, who stayed on the farm, but bless your other children in a different manner? And the faster you do some of those things, as far as are there other assets? Is there life insurance? Are there other things that you can bless with those kids, and then be able to set Robert up for the future? How about my wife and I are constantly fighting? She says that my parents are taking advantage of me as I'm working for less because the farm, I think, will be mine someday. And this is sweat equity. How do you calculate the value of the son or daughter who stayed on the farm? It's for sweat equity. So you're going to work for less. I will tell you, I'm not a fan of sweat equity. I think that you should pay your son or daughter for what they're worth. If you can't do that because of where the financial standing of the business is, then there needs to be a plan, and there needs to be a purpose of tracking that sweat equity that is accounted for each year, i.e. have a spreadsheet that is communicated throughout the family. And then as you work with your estate planning attorney, that you have the ability to compensate for that sweat equity, and then it's not forgotten. What happens too many times, or we forget of the sweat equity that was put in 10, 15, 20 years ago, and then the estate plan doesn't account for that. So how can we account for that? And I'm going to skip this example. If that sweat equity is an issue in your family, there's a whole lesson from our friend Dave Gaylor out in Nebraska, that Darlene can visit with you during lunch. I'm sure she can, but if you want more information on that, I can speak to you online on that. In communication, Darlene's going to talk about this. Mom and dad won't talk about the future. They keep saying, don't worry, kid, this will all be yours someday. How do I start a conversation? And those conversations are tough, right? Because maybe you have an LLC and we had a family meeting. Everyone got mad and stormed out. It took 2 weeks before my uncles would speak again. So I believe communication, the things that Darlene's going to teach you this afternoon, are so crucial. crucial conversations. We can avoid those conversations. We can face them and handle them poorly, or we can face them well and handle them well. I think if your family is struggling with communication, I would encourage you to do as much as you can to identify those communication barriers, identify the stressors that are out there, and then incorporate family business meetings. All these things Darlene's going to talk about this afternoon, but I will tell you the family communication part of this farm transition is probably what this workshop could be just completely on. It's just the communication aspect. So take time to identify the communication issues that are within your family. And I would encourage you to have some of those discussions. And have you ask your kids what they think. Here's what we challenge. We challenge our farm families to ask your kids, what do they think about this process? You'll see on the right side of the screen is a form that we use. Again, if you want it, just drop me a note. I'll be happy to send it to you. It's like, we want to know as parents, what would you do if you were in our shoes as you're doing this farm succession and estate plan? How would you approach it? And then I think you'll find out that your kids, your children will give you permission to do some of the things that you want to do, but you were concerned about. I have a quote here just from a week ago from someone who was on our online course about they actually took the opportunity to reach out and talk to their kids about what's going to happen, their kids. And I'll read what Pam said here. David, we already reached out to our children. They provided their ideas on how we should manage. Do you know the coolest part of this? We realized that despite us, we have amazing kids who are kind and caring. We enjoyed reading what each child had to say, laughed about the way they presented it. Some had some spreadsheets and other things, and cried at each of their responses. And we found out that we loved them just a little bit more than we thought was ever possible. So they took the time, this family took the time to have their kids talk about what the future and to start that dialogue. And I think that will tie nicely into what Darlene's going to talk about, that communication and opening the door for communication for your children to have input on what you're thinking. And then establish a timeline. One of your goals after today should be as you go home, sit down this weekend and put together a schedule on how you feel this transition planning timeline is going to be, about how you're going to develop your goals, set those meeting times. When are you going to meet with the attorneys? When are you going to identify the professionals that can help you? Meet with your accountants. You start to put this plan in place. Now, it's going to be different for all of us. But the real secret to this is taking the time to set some goals as a family as you start this process, because it's going to be so easy here in about 6 weeks to get really busy out in the fields and then put this to the back burner until the snow flies next winter. And just think about some other elephants in the room. I don't know what's causing stress in your family, but here's how are you going to overcome the elephants when communication among family members is poor? How are you going to overcome when the senior generation won't discuss the future? Some other elephants that we see is, I don't trust my daughter and son-in-law, or maybe my spouse. I don't know if what will my spouse do after I'm gone? Or maybe what do I do when I don't believe my successor has what it takes to run the operation? Each of us has some type of dysfunctionality within our family. Each of us have some type of elephant in the room. My encouragement to you is to make sure that you've identified those underlying issues that are happening. Doesn't mean you have to share them with me or anybody else, but the one person that you need to share these elephants with is your attorney. Your agriculture attorney is going to need to know what the elephants in the room are, because trust me, every elephant that's there's probably some type of estate planning mechanism that is able to help you. I had a list of 4 or 5 when I did my estate plan for our farm. And my attorney looked at me and said, David, don't worry, because we can navigate and negotiate around these things that you're concerned about. And he was able to write them into my estate plan. So I sleep better at night because I know some of the things that were concerning me about the future, he was able to address when he did my plan with me. My dad is on his third marriage, has 9 kids between 4 different women. I'm the only one who's currently working on the farm. He has 4 kids under the age of 10 with his current wife. How do I know that my sweat equity is going to pay off considering his current wife is 15 years younger than he? So there's an elephant in the room. This was a man, a 23-year-old man in Western Ohio, 23 years old. And this is what he was facing about the future of his farm. I have 3 daughters, 2 who can manage their finances and 1 who can spend money faster than she gets it. Can I treat them differently in my estate plan? A concern of a family. And their attorney helped them. They actually developed a trust that when they pass away, that 2 of their daughters will get their money. And the other daughter who has a hurt and a hang up that would impact her if she received a sizable amount of money, she's going to be blessed, but she's only going to be blessed with 7.5% of that estate per year. She actually thanked her mom and dad when they sat down and talked to her about this, thanked them that they were thinking about this. And if they thought it through right, that she should have money until she's 90 some years old. And if she's not there, then the grandchildren will be blessed with that. And there's another one in there about leasing land. I just think it's so important that we develop the skills of our generation to talk to the generations that we might be renting land from. In other words, are we setting our kids up to have relationships with those landlords, as well as not only the current landlord, but who will be the landlord in the future? So I'm going to leave you on I'm going to kind of pause and just ask you what your trigger is going to be for your family to put in place, because I want to share you what my triggers were. Preparing your farm, family, and yourself. If you only had 7 weeks to live, what are the most important things you would need to do for the farm and family to continue without you? This happened to us. My dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer on May 1st. That was the busiest time. Again, thinking of the time that's the busiest time on your farm, 7 weeks to live. And he passed away after 7 weeks and learned a lot in those 7 weeks. But if you had to prepare your farm to go on without you, could you do it in 7 weeks? The good Lord thought David needed a lot more lessons. So after my dad passed away, 6 months after that, my wife was diagnosed with multiple myeloma cancer. So that's a cancer that you don't beat either. And Jamie fought that valiantly for 5 years and passed away after that. But think about your children, your family. How do they operate without you? Do you have the communications, those difficult conversations? Have you had those so that they can operate better without you? And if your plane crashed today, would you be ready to die? So this almost happened to me in 2016. And the best thing for me in that situation was that I got to see how I would react in that situation. So I challenge you to think about preparing your farm, getting the farm ready, getting your family ready, and getting yourself ready. I think there's different reflections as you go through all three of those. Get your farm ready, get your family ready, and I think most importantly, make sure that you're ready. And this is most of my thoughts. I would love to have my dad. I'd love to have Jamie back, but those lessons in life had taken me to other places. One of those places was Emily, my new wife, who has been a complete blessing that I'll be eternally grateful for. But one of the things on the farm, and just my thoughts about these are David's thoughts, the affirmation. My dad's last words to me was he loved me. And I just hope and encourage each of you to make sure that you're expressing to those around you how much that you love them and how much you appreciate them, and that you take time to do some self-reflection. So this is not sometimes a process that is easy. But if you want any of our resources, go to go.osu.edu/farm succession. We also have bulletins about planning for the future, your farm bulletin series. Again, it's an extension. We're extension folks. So you just go grab them, all that you want. If there's any materials that can help you in your efforts as you're moving through this process, just go to farmoffice.osu.edu and you'd be glad to just download them to your computer and use them in any way that you might be able to. And there to just give a quick resource and credits to those that there are some great books out there that can help you, especially when you get into the farm succession side. And then if there's anything, I'll leave those quotes there. Those are 3 quotes that were near and dear to my dad's heart. I try to share those on every workshop that we have, and they're there in your notes, so you'll have those. But if there's anything that I can do for you, there is my contact information. My email is marrison.2@osu.edu. And my phone number direct to me, wherever I am, that's where I am, 740-722-6073. So if there's anything that I can help out with you in the future, just don't hesitate to let me know. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of this program.
Phil Taylor is with us today from Horizon Farm Credit. He is a farm business consultant at Horizon, and he will speak to us on the financial aspects of farm succession planning. He works in Western Pennsylvania and has done so for over 10 years. He's a certified farm succession coordinator through the International Farm Transition Network, and he has more than 35 years of agriculture industry experience, specializing in accounting, financial business analysis, farm succession and transition, feasibility investigations, and team facilitation. He works with families understanding the importance of complete and accurate financial and production records for making the best management decisions for the future of their farm.
Thank you for the opportunity to share some things today. Dave did a very good and extensive job of introducing the thoughts about farm succession and transition, and like him, I interchange the 2 words as well. I think that they're very much the same thing. A little bit more background about me, where I'm from. I grew up in Erie County, Pennsylvania, so I'm a Western Pennsylvania guy, Steelers fan all the way for those in the Indiana region here. Attended Penn State way back in the early 80s, have a degree at Penn State in dairy science. Much of my first 20 or so years in the industry had to deal with cows, with the people that worked with cows. Then in 1999, my family and I moved to Michigan. I worked with Michigan State Extension up there, and until 2012, moved back to the area. My wife was from Crawford County, so it was a move back closer to home. And we now reside actually just across the state line in Ohio. I actually live closer to Dave's farm than he does at this point. We are just due west of Meadville. My primary office is in Meadville, and so that's where I work out of most of the time. So my task today was to talk about some of the financial aspects of farm succession and transition, and some of the things that we deal with on a project basis when we work with a family working on that succession planning. And let's see, I'm trying to think. Yeah. So my coworker, Rob Goodling, will be speaking at the other location here in a few weeks or days. He and I put this set of slides together. So what will we be covering today? I'm going to talk about some of the elements and aspects of the farm business transfer, some of the financial keys to a successful farm transition, ways that you can improve financial position and avoid some pitfalls. Specifically, we were asked to touch on some topics about Social Security. So I want to share some Social Security considerations for you, and also touch on the tax consideration. I'm not a current tax professional, but there was a time in my career back when I first started, at that time with Ag Choice, now Horizon, where I did about 4 years of tax work, did some tax returns. So I understand the basics of the tax laws and structures and can help in that way as well. So we're going to touch on a few of those. And I just needed to go back. I hit the button twice there. So some elements of farm succession. Certainly, in most cases, we find that farms are very interested in continuation of the business. So one of their primary goals is to keep the farm in the family or keep the farm operating. We see that as a transition of labor and management that has to occur. We see that there's always a division of earnings. Who's going to make the income or take the earnings that are generated from that farm business? And then finally, there's a transition of asset ownership at some point during the transition. We'll talk about some of those aspects here. So between the parent or the owner and the child or the successor, we see there's this transfer of ownership, transfer of management, and division of income. If you only accomplish two of these three things, you'll have a less than fully successful transition of that farm business. And it seldom happens at the same time. We see over the course of time, these three things get transferred at a different stage. The first one usually is management. We have a lot of farm families that we deal with. We have a senior generation, we have a junior generation, and the junior generation has stepped in and is already managing the cows or the livestock, and the senior generation may still be managing the crops or vice versa. And so some of that management decision-making has already started to transfer. Then we start talking about the division of income, who's going to make the earnings from the farm and to what degree. And if that's a part-time family member that's in there, how much are their earnings compared to the others? One aspect that we look at often related to taxes is getting more income or more cash income to the next generation, because they're oftentimes the ones that have tax credits, children perhaps, earned income credits that they can take more advantage of than the senior generation. So from an overall tax viewpoint, we can get more income through the tax system at a lower cost for the whole family. And then the final transfer usually is the transfer of ownership. We usually see transition of ownership starting with the operating assets first. That would be the livestock, the machinery and equipment, then some of the real properties, the buildings, some of the land, and finally the land is usually the last asset to be transitioned and transferred. And there we are. Cattle and machinery usually go first, the operating assets, then the facilities, and then the land ownership. One of the questions I like to ask when I'm working with a farm family, and we've got, the next generation is already in their 30s or 40s, and a piece of land comes up available at the neighbors or just down the road, who's in the best position to buy that land, or who should buy that land? We automatically always think mom and dad are just going to buy the next 10 acres or the next 15, whatever that acreage might be. But it might be time for the next generation to step in and start accumulating some of those assets and not get them into mom and dad's hands. We have to deal with at a later time. So preparing financially for succession, in our terminology, cash is king, and so anytime for any business, strong liquidity is critical. That's virtually your current position on your balance sheet. Are you in a pretty strong current position with cash or other assets that can be sold quickly to generate cash? Financial analysis history, understanding the trends of the business. Where was the trend 5 or 10 years in history? And how has that progressed through time? What's happening to net worth? One of the key things about financial aspects of any business, but in farming, is what's happening to the net worth? Are we seeing that net worth or that equity grow year in and year out? Is the farm making profit? And by profit, we use the term accrual net income. Profit is not just cash. And that's one of the reasons the tax return is not generally a good indicator of the true profit of the business. So we could have spent a lot of cash, but we grew a lot of crop. We have a lot of livestock inventory. And so part of our profit is the change in those inventories. So it's not just cash. It's an accrual adjusted true profit. Is the farm able to cash flow? Can the farm meet its cash flow obligations? Meets all of its expenses, pays all of its loans and principal payments, pays any lease payments that it has. Is it able to cash flow? So an annual review of key financial statements and indicators is essential, we believe, in monitoring the history or the trends of the business. Be aware of credit scores, especially for the next generation, because there's an impact on an entity. So let's say in the case of a family that forms an LLC, brings in one of the children who happens to have a very, very low credit score, has gotten themselves into some financial difficulty, and the LLC then wants to go get a loan and borrow some money. Well, one of the factors of that LLC or the loan is going to be what's the credit score of all the people that are liable for this loan. And when and they see that one of the creditors has a terrible credit score, that could have an impact on that. And so we want to be aware of credit scores. And we always feel creating a business plan, a savings plan, creating a budget are very good aspects of the processes of going through this succession and this transition. We encourage the next generation to take on or be involved in the management decisions on the farm. Dave shared a couple of examples earlier where the senior generation was still in charge, still making all the decisions, and that wasn't necessarily the best thing for that business and for that transition. Perhaps you've seen these bumper stickers that occurred on the... I'm not a bumper sticker fan. When somebody puts a bumper sticker on one of our vehicles, I'm like, why did you do that? But we see these bumper stickers from time to time. No farms, no food. I like that one. That would be one I'd actually put on there. But I like the one about, if you're going to complain about farmers, please don't talk with your mouth full. That'd be one I'd put on my bumper if I had to. Maybe my window. That'd be better on the window. Anyway, my wife has this one on the refrigerator. No coffee, no work. And you see this one at establishments all the time. No shirt, no suit, no shoes, no service. But related to our topic this morning, I came up with one of my own. I said, no money, no succession. So it's critical that the business is profitable. It makes it a lot easier to do the succession and transition if we're working with a profitable business. And so these unprofitable businesses have additional challenges in doing the transition and succession because we're asking the farm to pay the bills, get out of debt, and compensate both generations, or even more than just two generations. So how do you know your farm is financially ready for succession to the next generation? You need to have excellent financial records for starters. Okay? That doesn't have to be a fancy computerized system of records. You don't have to know QuickBooks to have a good set of records to be in a position for farm succession. Know what your sales volumes, your gross income, is it great enough to support additional family members or the big change that's going to occur with the succession. A balance sheet with a net worth or equity of 65% or greater would be nice. And an annual net worth change that is moving forward, that is positive and moving up. The business is able to generate earnings and profit. It's attractive to the next generation. Okay, which kid in your family would want to take over a business that's been struggling and failing and not able to pay its bills, heavily in debt, and those kinds of things? That's not attractive to the next generation. A plan that provides adequate retirement income. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in detail, but this is one of the major ones I see as we talk with families about the future. Are we making sure that we're providing enough financial security for the senior generation? That we're not giving enough assets away that all of a sudden they've lost their income generating assets. And then having clear financial goals is certainly an objective that we encourage people to have and visit those on an annual basis. So some of the key financial measures that we work with, we talk about equity. That is simply, what are you worth? What's your net worth in the business? So we add up your assets on the balance sheet, we subtract the liabilities, and we end up with an equity number. And that number we want to see continuing to increase. Liquidity, that's the part of that balance sheet that's current. What's going to happen over the next 12 months? Do we have enough current assets to cover whatever current liabilities we might have? Profitability, we visited that earlier. That's a net income, accrual adjusted profitability number. Efficiency of our assets. Are the assets working for us? We have investment in these livestock. We have investment in machinery and equipment and buildings. Are we able to generate a lot of income with those assets? And that's the measures we look at on efficiency. And then repayment capacity, the cash flow. Can we meet all the payments that are due for the farm business? So the important financial statements that we look at, watch closely, are the balance sheet and that net worth statement. I'm one of the teachers of our Ag Biz Masters courses that we have designed for young farmers. and I get to teach the balance sheet part of that. So I love to talk about balance sheets and have people create balance sheets and keep them on an annual basis. Remember this thing about balance sheets, the hardest, if you've never created a balance sheet, the hardest one to create is the first one, because from then on it's easier just to adjust the numbers rather than to come up with the numbers. For most of our farm families, I say they're going to have more than one balance sheet. You'll have a business balance sheet, you'll have a personal balance sheet, and you combine those, you have a consolidated balance sheet. And so how much of the assets and liabilities on your balance sheet are business related? How many of them are personal related? Because when we think about transition and that whole equity and fairness thing, the farm assets can go to the farm heirs. Some of those non-farm assets may be available to go to the non-farm heirs. So the balance sheet, very, very critical. The accrual adjusted income statement is true profit. Income minus expenses. Consider all of the adjustments to inventories that we had. How did the accounts payable change from one year to the next? How did the accounts receivable change from one year to the next? You shipped a load of steers on December 28th. You didn't get paid for it yet. That's an account receivable for you on your balance sheet. You didn't get the money until sometime in January, hopefully. Okay, so those factors go in here. How do those numbers change from year to year? That's that accrual adjustment. And then we consider depreciation as well. How are the assets of the farm depreciating over time? Okay, when we buy a new tractor, the next year it's probably not worth as much as it was when we bought. Well, that's not a good example right now, because any of you that have, tractors somehow are mysteriously accruing in value. But some of that, like let's use a skid loader. A well-used skid loader does not usually get more attractive with age. But so it's depreciating over time. So we take that into account as well. The cash flow statement tells us, did we meet our payments? Were we able to generate enough residual cash to make sure we can cover all the payments? We look at future projections and budgets. Once we've established a history, we can look forward then and say, what's this going to look like in the future when we change this operation and the next generation starts taking over and our income is different now and their income is different now? And can the farm continue to pay everybody and everything work out well? Capital expenditure planning is critical in our estates, in our farm business succession planning. Okay, we don't want to forget about the fact, hey, 2 years from now, we're going to need to replace the combine, or we need a new cattle trailer. Those things need to be talked about and discussed, because who's paying for that cattle trailer? Who's going to be buying that machinery and equipment? And financial indicators that we watch. There's a very good publication from Extension, and I wish I would have been smart enough to bring it and give you one, but it's the Farm Finance Scorecard, and it's 21 financial indicators. And if you write that down, Farm Finance Scorecard, it would be a good one to Google and search. And the reason that's such a good publication is it shows you these 21 financial measures, then it defines them, tells you what does that number mean, and then it gives you the equation for how to calculate it. And so you can do your own assessment of your business with that Farm Finance Scorecard. Now, there's one financial statement I left off this list. Can you tell me what it is? Anybody tell me what it is? I wasn't smart enough to think of it before we did the slide set. I actually thought of it while Dave was speaking. An important financial statement. I referenced it earlier. Profit and loss, close. That would come into play into the income statement, a profit and loss statement. What's due April 18th this year? Taxes. Yeah. So important financial statements would include generally our tax returns, because as we look at succession, transition, we want to look at your history. What do your previous year's tax returns look like? Where are you getting other income? When we want to try to secure that senior generation income, we're going to be interested in knowing what other sources of income do they have. Those show up on the tax return often. Now, for a farm business, the Schedule F, I still believe it's not a good indicator of true profit, because there's some things missing on that. on that Schedule F, and we're usually expensing depreciation as high as we can to keep that profit low, so we're paying fewer taxes. So those are the important financial statements that we're working on. Some other key financial aspects is the valuation of the farm business assets. It's important to have a good and complete list of all the assets of the farm. How we're going to treat the farm and non-farm heirs. Are we going to treat them equally, fairly, differently, equal? All those different questions come into play. Do we have life or disability insurance? Dave talked about those D words. Death, disability are two of them. And so do we have protection for the business? First of all, with some life insurance policies, are we protecting our families with those life insurance policies as well? And who's actually going to own that life insurance policy and make the premium payments for it? And who's going to be the beneficiary of those? Oftentimes, we'll have a buy-sell agreement, some transition plans that spell out who's purchasing what or who's transitioning what to whom, and it answers what do we do if, all those questions about what happens if this scenario arises or some of those things take place. Dividing the earnings. Who's compensated for what? This goes back a little bit to who is doing what on the farm. Is there a job description in place? Are the people being compensated fairly or adequately for the job that they're doing? Okay. Compensation is a lot more than cash. It might be fringe benefits. We often go through a process of actually figuring out what is, we're paying our son to work on the farm and manage things, and we pay him some wage, but he also has a house to live in. He's getting milk and meat. He's getting some of these other fringe benefits. What does that all add up to? So we want to show what's the total compensation for that son or daughter that's working on the farm for us. And then how does the dividing of earnings impact the tax ramifications? As I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's advantageous to get more cash to the next generation who has more tax credits to use. So there's a lot of factors in this succession and transition planning that is impacted by the tax ramifications. We'll talk some more about those in a little bit. So some keys to the financial success: an annual family meeting that and it surprises me how many farms don't report that we do an annual meeting at the end of January to review last year. We discuss the financial performance, review those financial statements, look at those key ratios. Did the farm business do better than the previous couple of years? Did it do worse? Why did it do worse? What were the factors? It was dry this year. Grass didn't grow, hay didn't grow, and just had a bad year. Our inventories were down because of it, things like that. So we explain what was it about the year that was poor. We discussed the performance on yield and efficiency measures. Okay, corn crop was very good. Why was it so good? What management change did we make that improved the corn crop or whatever crop we're talking about? Why was the livestock performance better in a given year? So we're visiting those things. Want to keep those management issues strong, so that we're developing a strong business that's able to generate a lot of income and pay all those financial responsibilities that it has. And based on the previous year and what things have happened, we set new goals and objectives for the current year. Where do we want to see gross income grow this year? How are we going to do that? How can we cut expenses? What can we get more efficient? A couple points about avoiding pitfalls. First one would be to help you in avoiding pitfalls in this whole succession transition would be to find some professional help. Some skilled people that are skilled and experienced with farm transition and succession. That could be consultants, attorneys, accountants, and facilitators that have worked with other farm families, have some experience in agriculture, have seen some other things that can help you in your process of succession and transition. Another one to avoid in the pitfalls is having financial stability. So as I mentioned earlier, farms that generate earnings, strong earnings, and have good profit, have good cash flow, it's easier on the transition and succession plans. How do you know if you've got that financial stability? It's utilizing those statements that we talked about before, analyzing that business, having some help, evaluating all of those things. And then charting a course. How's the business going to grow? Mom and dad are going to retire. We're going to have to bring in some more labor. How do we pay both mom and dad a retirement and pay for new labor? The business might have to grow some way. We may have to add some acres. We might have to add some livestock numbers. We have to do a completely different enterprise. And is that part of are we going to operate as status quo and continue to do that? What we've done in the past, or are there operational changes that are going to have to occur? So we talked through a lot of these different aspects of, okay, new people are coming in, paying for the senior generation. How does it all get done? One other pitfall that you can avoid, one other way to avoid pitfalls, it has to do with timing. Okay? If you rush this process, you're bound to make some mistakes. So I would say timing factor, it's never too early to start, but you can move too quickly, too fast, and maybe make some decisions that aren't the best. We wanted to address a few things about financial security for the senior generation. I think this is very important. We don't want to make decisions that put our senior generations in harm's way. We talk about 3 methods of transferring wealth, transferring the business. You can sell it, you can gift it, or the next generation can inherit it. You can pass it through inheritance. Most succession plans involve more than one method. Some combination of these 3 or all 3 is usually works out to be a very good method. The methods of the transition must not jeopardize, however, the senior generation's financial security. Let's look at a few things about that. We want to know what the sources of retirement income are for that senior generation. Is everything going to have to come from the farm itself? Are there other resources that they have, retirement accounts, different things like that? We want to know what the living expenses are that they are requiring currently. What's it cost them to live? What's their cost of living? And develop a budget for that annual living expense. So that way we can then make plans for how do we continue that level of income or even perhaps grow it over time so that that senior generation is taken care of. I put the RV on here just because I've seen one talk about bumper stickers. Big RV with a bumper sticker. I'm spending my kids' inheritance. And I didn't put this up there to begrudge anybody if you have a nice RV. I mean, enjoy it because someday it's got to be sold and that's going to be part of the estate. So the kids really aren't out a whole lot. It's just the fuel it takes to run them right now. It's burning up cash. But so it's important that we want to know the retirement income for that senior generation. A few comments about long-term care. And I was on a webinar over sometime last fall, and it was actually done by one of the Ohio State attorneys that Dave mentioned in his thing, Robert Moore, was talking about some data about long-term care costs. Okay, so be familiar with the look-back period for long-term care. Most of you are probably well aware or have experience with other families, or you've heard about the fact that long-term care facilities can confiscate assets to pay for long-term health care. The look-back period right now is still 5 years. So anything that was transferred in the last 5 years, they can still go back and look at and say, was that a fair transfer? Did you sell something under its value? Different aspects like that. So that's a critical time frame is the look-back period. But long-term care doesn't necessarily mean at a facility. And so when Attorney Moore was talking about this, made the point that long-term care doesn't have to necessarily mean at a facility. But he shared this data. A 65-year-old person today has a 69% chance of needing some long-term care. So roughly 2/3 of senior citizens are going to need some long-term care at some point. For women, that average is about 3.7 years of care. For those that do, it's about 3.7 years. For men, it's a little bit shorter, 2.2 years of care. So that length of care, let's use an average of 3 years. The first year is often at home or unpaid services. Okay, so that long-term care somebody needs, that might be family or friends, maybe some church people help out and take care of somebody that needs some long-term care. That second year might be at-home paid services. Somebody can come into the home. You don't need to have mom or dad go to the facility at that point, and that paid at-home service, he was showing an average number was about $60,000 a year. The third year he was showing was if they needed to go to the nursing home for that third year, potentially at that point $90,000. I've heard numbers that are much higher than that, up to $120,000, $10,000 a month even. So his point was the historical average cost per person could be, for an average person, $150,000 of long-term care. But he also talked about what he termed the outlier scenario, and that is that 20% of those 69, or 1/5 of the 2/3, will require 5 years of more of care. And even if you consider 1 year at no cost, it's not hard to find long-term care costing a farm family over $500,000 possible. So, point being that not everybody's going to need it. 2/3 of people will need some kind of long-term care. And so that's a big part of this plan. Farm families don't want to see their farms gobbled up by having to pay for this long-term care. Farm having to be sold, worst case scenario, farm having to be sold to pay for those costs. Darlene wanted us to talk about Social Security, do some background talk about that. I'm not a Social Security expert, but I know enough to ask the right questions and share with you the questions that you should be asking as well. So the biggest thing about Social Security is know your benefits and know when the best time to start. If you're not familiar with it, you can check out your own Social Security at the government website, ssa.gov. You can set up an account. You can go in and check your Social Security statement. They used to mail them to us, years ago on your birthday. They stopped doing that. Now they expect you to go do the work to find your Social Security statement. So it is out there, and it can tell you what your benefits are going to be. Related to farm succession, the supplemental Social Security is meant to be a supplemental income source. It was never intended to be enough money to pay somebody in their retirement years. And so it's only meant to be a supplement to your other sources. It was not meant to put all of your retirement eggs in that one basket. Other farm retiree income sources that we see and deal with all the time, wage income from the farm or other sources. So we often see a lot of times the farm gets transitioned, the succession has happened, the next generation is now the operators, maybe also the owners. Mom and dad are still working for the farm. Mom does the book work, dad's running tractors, things like that, but they have a lot more time off perhaps, but they still have a source of income coming from the farm. The senior generation may have savings and investments. Those could be retirement savings and any of those systems that are ways to save for retirement, the IRAs, 401ks, etc. Common on a lot of our farms is the rent or lease income. That might be farm land that they still own. And so that's one of those assets that we didn't necessarily transition yet. And mom and dad can still have income coming from that farmland that's leased to the farm. They may have other lease income options. Might have a rental house in town that they're still receiving income from. Royalties. In this area, the oil, gas, and mineral rights and royalties that a lot of our farm families are seeing are very strong right now. And so that's a very good income source for the senior generation. And then we'll have capital sales, could be of the farm or the non-farm assets or things like timber or any other capital the family owns. Social Security, a lot of the question we get about Social Security, is it taxable? Okay. So does anybody know what's the answer to that question? Is it taxable? Sometimes. That's the right answer. Sometimes. The thing you have to remember is the first IRS rule about taxable income. I learned from Michigan State when I worked up there. The director of the income tax school that they had at the college up there, and I worked with him in his office there. But the first IRS rule about taxable income is all income is taxable. All income is taxable. Of course, unless it isn't. So there's IRS rules that can benefit us that say, okay, yeah, you made this income, but it's not taxable. So think of it, yeah, all the income is taxable unless it isn't. So Social Security income, is it taxable? Well, direct from the IRS Social Security website, you must pay taxes on up to 85% of your Social Security benefits if you file a federal return as an individual and your combined income exceeds $25,000. Or if you file a joint return and you and your spouse have combined income of more than $32,000. So can you say marriage penalty? To me, that's a major marriage penalty. That number should be $50,000 in my mind, but it's only $32,000. So if you're married, you have a penalty of about $18,000 that you have to pay Social Security tax on if you exceed that $32,000. And if you are married and file a separate return, heaven help you, you will almost always have to pay taxes on your benefits. So what's combined income? What's included in that? Things are wages, capital gains, royalties, rents, retirement savings, traditional IRAs, 401ks. So virtually most of the income sources that we talked about a little bit ago are included in that combined income. The only things that are excluded, a few of the things excluded are Roth IRAs, life insurance, and some few others. The equation in that lower right-hand corner is from the Social Security website. Your adjusted gross income plus any non-taxable interest plus half of your Social Security benefits is what is calculated as your combined income on the tax return. So it's not going to be easy to get away from paying tax on your Social Security. Some portion of it's going to be taxed. Is there an age limit? There is no age limit at which you no longer can be taxed on Social Security benefits. So if anybody, there's this idea circulating that, okay, once I'm 70, reach maximum retirement age, my Social Security income won't be taxed. But no, that's not the case. Yes, it will be taxed. So as we think about farm succession and transition, one strategy is to delay the Social Security income if the plan is for the senior generation to continue to make sizable income from the farm. That might be in the form of those wages, capital gains, oil, gas, or mineral royalties, etc. So for some, it will be virtually impossible not to have some Social Security income taxed. That's okay. That just generally means your other income sources are strong, they're good, you had a profitable business, and that's all right. That's just the way it's going to be. Above all, consult with a Social Security specialist, somebody that visits the Social Security office, understand what your options are. So prior to retirement age, if you take Social Security prior to your full retirement age, I'm going to guess for most of us in this room, it's 67 years old. But taking Social Security prior to that retirement age reduces your benefit. It is subject to some income limitations, and if you're less than 65 years old, there's some higher cost of medical insurances. So delaying Social Security can have huge financial benefits. You have a handout in your packet with a little bit of yellow highlighting on it. I just wanted to, it was too small to put up on I put the slide on the screen, but we also provided a handout for you. A couple of critical things on here in the first box on the left-hand side, where it talks about the percentage of full benefits if the worker receives benefits at age 62. So if you decided to take Social Security at age 62, how much are you giving up? And for a worker, they're giving up 70% of their Social Security benefit to take it earlier. Okay? And the spouse of that worker would be giving up 65% of their spousal benefit if they start taking Social Security at age 62. If you look over to the right-hand side, in the box in the right-hand side, what's the benefit of waiting on taking Social Security? If you were born after 1942, the increase in benefits each year after your full retirement age is about 8%. Okay? So you're increasing your your benefits by 8% automatically by waiting till each year after your full retirement age up to age 70. So a person that's full retirement age is 67, they wait to start taking Social Security until they're 70, their benefit increase is 24%. There are some benefits to spouses depending on the specific situation, and that's why we coach people to talk with the Social Security Administration specifically. But a spouse may be able to receive a half of the spouse's benefit depending on their age, and this is critical especially if one spouse has significantly higher EIA, or your Social Security benefit. So in some cases on our farms, we have a spouse who worked off the farm for 20 years, 25 years, and built up a fairly significant Social Security, but the farm maintained, very little income over those years, didn't want to pay a lot of tax, had low profitability on the Schedule F for all those times, and the farmer doesn't have a very high Social Security income potential. So it may be possible that the spouse's half is higher than the other spouse's retirement benefits. For example, my wife has been a stay-at-home mom. We had 6 kids. She homeschooled all 6 of them and did not work much once we were married. And so she has very, very low Social Security. So she'll probably benefit from half of mine better than trying to take her own. So there's some benefits to the spousal side of the Social Security. We already mentioned that Social Security statements are available online. And then Social Security has these COLA adjustments you may have heard of, these cost of living adjustments. I thought it was pretty interesting that from 2009 to 2020, the average cost of living adjustment for Social Security was about 1.375%. And inflation during that time averaged about 1.5%. In 2021, the cost of living adjustment jumped to 5.9% when inflation rose to 4.7%. And last year, the cost of living adjustment rose 8.7% when the inflation rate was close to 8%. So Social Security is affected pretty significantly by the cost of living adjustments. But we went 11 years there with hardly, very, very little adjustment in that cost of living number for Social Security. Another table that is in the handout talks more about the penalty of taking benefits at age 62 versus full retirement age. It's basically the inverse of those numbers I talked about before. So for a primary person, you have a 30% benefit. The spouse has a 35% benefit if you're 60 or older, or if you were born in 1960 and your full retirement age is 67. And then the last handout shows that effect of early or delayed retirement on retirement benefits. Down at the bottom, if you were born in 1960 or later, you can see the full retirement age is 67. And then it shows if you retired at age, or if you took Social Security at 62, you would have 70% of your primary insurance amount, or your PIA. If you wait until age 70, you'd have 124%. So we have a lot of farm families where the senior generation is in their mid-60s and they're still working every day. They're still operating every day. That generation may still be filing the Schedule F for the farm, or they're involved in the LLC of the operations. And so they're still getting sizable income from the farm business or other sources. And by taking Social Security, they don't really need that income yet. And if by waiting, they can see some benefit. That's not the case for every family. There are situations where the family needs that income. And so taking it early is not detrimental, it's necessary. In thinking of it in terms of the survivor benefits, likely one person of the couple will outlive the time it takes to lose the benefits by waiting. And that's usually in somebody's late 70s. And what I mean by you lose the benefit by waiting if you start taking it early, you start getting paid, okay, earlier. So you start receiving that income. If you receive that income over a longer period of time, the potential is you've got more total Social Security income. But at about the late age, in the late 70s, those numbers match up, okay, and there's no longer a benefit for having taken it earlier. And so with people living longer, there's less time to recover, and so there's more benefit for, again, a bigger benefit for waiting for taking that Social Security. Not explaining it real well. But the other factor is if you take Social Security early and it's taxed because your income exceeds those levels we talked about earlier, now we're losing a little bit more because that income is being taxed more heavily. Okay, other income sources that the senior generations will have, retirement accounts. We can draw from those 3 to 4% to last a lifetime. The benefits that come from tax-deferred accounts like 401ks or regular IRA accounts, those are taxable as we receive that income. And we have to keep that into account as well. How does that affect the total income picture for the senior generation is critical when we talk about those things. Income from other sources, we talked about some of that. The balance of income has to come from those other sources that might be, again, continued employment of any sort, either on the farm or somewhere else, rental properties, lease or sale of assets, and then royalties are often an income source for many of our farm clients. Okay, a few tax considerations. Understand that assets are not all taxed at the same rate. Okay? So those of you with beef cattle, you have some raised mature cows. When you sell those raised mature cows, how much is the income? What's the income tax on the sale of those raised cows? It's a capital gain. What's the capital gain? So you own that cow longer than 1 year, so it's long-term capital gain, not short-term capital gain. That's different. So we own that raised cow for over a year. We raised her up. Now we sell her. It's considered a capital gain. What's the tax rate for that capital gain? It depends. Okay? It's either 15% or it might be 25%. Or it might be 0%. Because if your total income is less than roughly about $75,000 to $80,000, the sale of those mature cows, in the same case for raised dairy cows, our cold dairy cows, the tax rate, if our income stays under that $80,000, is 0. Okay? So a tax benefit for long-term capital gain sale. It might also apply to timber sales. Okay? So the gain of a timber sale could be low enough that keeps our income at a certain level below that break-even point, and the capital gains tax rate on that timber could be 0. So it takes a lot of strategic management. Talk to your accountant about what you're going to do before you sell all that timber. Call your tax accountant. How's this going to affect our taxes next year? The forester said there's $100,000 worth of timber out there. Is there a plan? Can we do something to manage that tax that's going to be paid on? Okay. Just an example of how the tax law can actually work in the favor of some farmers. So we have tax rates on machinery and farm buildings. That's the toughest one in our succession and transition plan, because there's this thing called depreciation recapture tax. So you bought a tractor, you depreciated it, you sell the tractor, now you have to pay back that depreciation and get taxed on that. Okay? So we try to develop some plans in the transition and succession that could be tax favorable. We don't sell all the equipment in 1 year, because that's the other problem with machinery and improvement sales, is it's taxed at the ordinary income tax rate. So if mom and dad sell the farm and they have all of that income, that jumps them into a higher tax bracket. Now we're paying a higher tax rate on all of the sale of those capital assets. So if we can stretch that out, spread that out, then we can probably save tax over the life of the transition of the succession plan. There's a big benefit to a primary residence. People that have lived in their house 2 of the last 5 years, that's the majority of our senior generation of farm families, when they sell that residence or they sell the farm, the portion of that sale that's the residence, they get a major tax break, a lifetime exclusion for the sale of a residence. It's up to, I forget what the number is exactly, $450,000 to $500,000 of exclusion for a married couple. So our strategies are always to reduce capital gains, therefore capital gains tax, reduce the income that's subject to the higher tax brackets, and by timing, we can limit the asset sales in the same year. By selling assets over a period of time, over a period of years, we can generally save a fair amount of income tax, capital gains tax. Gifting versus selling versus inheriting. Because of the taxation differences, we need special consideration when introducing each of these transition tools. Talked about those long-term capital gains. A lot of the tax that you pay on capital gains is calculated on the difference between the sale price and the basis. So we have to establish what the basis is on all of these farm assets. One that I see that gets missed a lot is the sale of timber, because we don't have a good basis number. When we bought that 100 acres that had 30 acres of timber on it, we didn't establish the basis of the timber at the time we bought it. Because the appraiser didn't appraise it, or we just didn't get it done. And so when we go to sell timber off that land, now we have to use a basis of 0 versus something that would have been established prior to that. More capital gain, more capital gains tax. Installment sales versus lump sums. Some of the assets we can do an installment sale on. Land is a pretty good example. We can pay for that land over time and then only owe the capital gains tax on the principal portion of that sale for that year. So installment sale can be real beneficial sometimes in moving farm assets to the next generation. A successful plan doesn't happen overnight. It takes careful thought, consideration that evolves over time. So we start with a plan today. In 2 weeks, we might have thought of something that's changing. Somebody's life event makes us change that plan again, and it evolves as over time. But it's critical to start the conversation today. Your family and your family's future depend on it. To me, the bottom line is this: get help. Okay? And I'm not saying that because you all need help. I'm just saying that because that's how you're going to make a successful plan and a successful transition. Find some knowledgeable professionals to help you through the succession process. There will be questions about taxation. There will be questions about the legal aspects. You're going to hear some of that later. There are going to be questions about the financial aspects. Pulling people, a team together to let those people help you through the process of discussing these things. The goals and objectives that you have will be instrumental in helping you with that succession transition plan. Dave mentioned earlier the cost of doing that. Yes, it can be substantial, but the cost of making a mistake can be oh so much more. So, contact information for me and for Rob, my counterpart, and thank you for your kind attention.
And if we wonder where we're getting the land for the next generation, for beginning farmers and so on, you know, there's not more land being made. We have to utilize what we have. So it's very important to get the transition planning done and to do it well. And I always like to say, if we did it, anybody can do it, and we did it wrong, but we accomplished it. So that's the thing you have to remember. There's as many ways to transition your farm as there are farms, and different things are right for different people and for different farms, but that's why we go to good professionals to help us with it. And where does the challenges start in the communication? situation, I think, is because lots of times you have multiple generations with multiple ideas and multiple ideals on the same farm. At least that's what's happened, in our farm. So you have a lot to work through. You have a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different ideas. And, what could possibly go wrong in these situations? Many things that we try to avoid in the communication aspect is because we don't want to face the reality of growing old. We don't want to give up control. We want to transition to farm, but we want to maintain control, and that's not always possible, and that's not always the best thing to have happen. As we grow older, we do become more risk adverse, so we often prefer not to change and not to change things when we should be working through some of these things. Issues are raised and there is potential conflict, but so we try to avoid them. Difficult decisions about assets, as you well know from all the conversations, you have to make a choice, and there's not a perfect answer, but you do the best job you can. Concerns about the next generation's abilities or future plans. David covered that well this morning about how to prepare them. Fear of the unknown future. No one knows what lies ahead for any of us, so we just really have to embrace it and determine that we're going to move forward. And established family decision-making patterns can come into play, where he talked about grandpa making all the decisions. And there's lots of families that we have seen the similar things with, or father making decisions until he passes, that sort of thing. So it's important to work through these things, no matter how tough it can be. And assumptions are often wrong. So always remember that it's better to have the conversation, ask the people, because your assumption may easily be wrong. And why does this conflict come about? Well, you're looking at two different atmospheres here. You're looking at family, which is often emotionally based, the subconscious behavior, inward looking, minimizing change in a family. You want to keep things the same. In business, it's more task-based. It's conscious behavior, outward looking, and you're seeking to embrace change more often than you are within the family dynamic. So where they cross over in our family businesses is a great opportunity for friction and conflict. And we just have to work past that, really. A long time ago, a child psychologist told me that they act up at home more because they are most comfortable there. And he was talking about children, but through my lifetime, I've decided the same is true for children and adults. We're not going to leave out the adults here. And at that point, I looked at the gentleman and said, oh, I wish they weren't as comfortable at home then, because it would be nice if we didn't have those actions. But we do, so we just have to all work through them. So what we have to try to do, and just reiterating what has been said by others today, is work in that business and family area, in the middle there, building, have trust and have the commitment to accomplish it, business effectiveness, and to work towards family harmony if it's going to be within the family. So there are actually some communication tools you can use, and I just want to tell you that I've had 80-year-olds working on some of these things. I've had my husband do it as my guinea pig, and I learned something about him after we were married for quite a few years. And honestly, they've always been an effective resource. So I feel like anyone can accomplish them. And you have an extra booklet tucked in the back of your folder. It's called Farm Family Communication, and these instruments are in it. So I'll just talk a little bit about having the farm meetings, communication, self-assessment, conflicts, management styles, and the choices map. The one biggest thing I would say is developing the farm meetings as a communication tool for farms. And as you know, from what has been said by our legal experts, is the fact of how important it is for your business entities to have meetings and to make notes and so on, to have that record. But intentionally setting aside time to discuss farm business. And first of all, I would suggest, if you don't have it already, have a weekly planning and schedule sharing for on-farm members. We found that to be necessary when we had our daughter come back to the farm, so we could get everybody's schedules meshed, and have overall farm business planning meetings about the larger needs, assessment, brainstorming, and planning. And I've had people ask, when is it too early to have family members involved in the conversations? I honestly feel that it's never too early, but it can be too late. Before we came back to the farm, our children were 17 and 19, and we were too old to be doing this for us because my dad was 80 and we were 50. And I knew that because I worked in this. So we asked our children if they were interested. And I think people thought we were nuts when we did that. But honestly, we then included them in the farm business meetings. And what that did, we saw them taking, ownership. They felt valued. They felt accepted. And we rotate facilitation of the farm meetings. So it's not always one of the older adults facilitating the conversations, but we take turns. And it's been extremely helpful. And over the years, I have seen the kids really take ownership of the farm and their involvement and what their future plans are. And that was the goal. That was our whole goal all the time. So it does work. Small things that have a large impact, and I do want you to pay attention to this because we like to say in the kind of farm succession planning circles, things to try to keep off limits. And we joked about them this morning, but do not begin your conversation about you want to develop a succession plan or transfer the farm at the family holiday meal, okay? We know everyone's home. We know they're around the table. Do not do it there. We have even planned a farm meeting over a holiday weekend when we knew people were there, but a different day, a different evening, and not at the family dinner table. And it's best if you don't have your meetings at the family dinner table, because what happens is we all sit down in the same location. So our normal role in the family takes precedence, whether we know it or not. So hold your meetings somewhere else in a neutral location. We actually have a table set up in a different room that there was never a table and chairs in before, and that's kind of our farm meeting area. So we set up a different location. If you want an off-farm meeting room, that's great as well. Libraries I've found recently often have meeting rooms. They'll let you use churches, community centers. I know the Farm Credit Office often would let a farm family utilize a small space in their room or the back room of a coffee shop. On the farm, you might use a shed or something like that. And I've always said, throw a piece of plywood down and a couple sawhorses and make yourself a table if you want to. But it's best to keep it away from those other locations. So the one thing you have to remember, though, is when we put all these generations together, like I said before, there's going to be challenges. So there's going to be the next gen's way, there's going to be my way, and then we got to figure out what our way is. So there's going to have to be compromise. We're going to have to all compromise and work together on things. And the self-assessment exercise is the first thing I mentioned. And like I said, these are all in your books. There's also ground rules for meetings in that little booklet. So if you need any meeting ground rules, I've often found that just having the ground rules in front of people makes behavior stellar. And I did this for a group that I work with, and we had some trouble at the group. So I took the meeting rules and set them in front of everybody's places. We didn't have a bit of problems as long as I had those meeting rules set there in front of them. So, if you have any challenges, just try it. Sometimes it's very helpful. But anyhow, those are important aspects. But as far as this assessment, just have everybody take it, recognize and accept what you learned from that. Like I said, that's the first one I had my husband take. I brought it home from a Farm Transition Network meeting with John Baker from Iowa State. He's really good at farm transition. He's considered one of the experts. And I asked my husband to take it, and what it dawned on me then was the reason he didn't want to direct market beef or direct market meats in general. I was saying we're coming back to the farm. That's one thing we can do. And he kept saying no. Well, just for whatever reason, I'd lived with him for 26 years by then. It didn't dawn on me that he loves to work out on the farm. He loves to do all those things, but he doesn't necessarily want to be out with the public all the time. And of course, as you can tell, I'm not afraid to talk, so I don't mind that side of things. But why that didn't dawn on me before that, I don't know. So, well, we came to the conclusion that I would do the front side, he would do the back side, and we would do it that way. And we agreed upon that. So just also applaud others as you're growing outside your comfort zones for anyone in this situation, because as things happened, things grew, and he now goes to the farmer's market with me once a week, and we actually consider that one of our social events for the week. So he enjoys it too, but sometimes we all have to grow outside our comfort zones, but it's good to recognize where each person is to plug them in the right place on the farm. Conflict management styles, that kind of tells you what type of conflict management style you are, what others are, and you can even discuss those, but find ways to work through those conflicts in a more productive way. And I do like this saying, peace is not about the absence of conflict, but the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means. And I think that's very accurate. We're going to have differences, but how do we work through them? And acknowledge the differences at times. And I don't know if anybody in the room knew my dad, but my dad was known to be a very strong-willed, strong man. So we always knew that working together was going to be intense. Well, in his later years, he insisted that he help with tagging and vaccinating lambs. I had had sheep all my life, so I knew we were going to have conflicts. So the statement I would always make with him was, there are two ways to do this job, your way and my way, and both will accomplish the same thing. And that actually got us to start the job laughing because we knew it was absolutely true, and it made for a much better activity when we were working together like that. Now, my husband has said that the greatest gift that my dad gave to my siblings and I was the ability to work together to accomplish things. Because of his strong personality, we learned to work together to, I want to say, put things up to him, present things to him and so on. But I think it all started when we were sorting pigs. And I don't know if you've ever sorted pigs, but I was a kid, throughout my whole life, I've helped sort pigs. And when you're cutting the gates in and out and trying to separate out the right one, you really learn how to work together. And if you haven't tried it, you should, because it can be tough. So we did that, as kids. We learned how to do that working with my dad's personality. And so when it came to succession planning, like I said, we started it late, we did it wrong, but we accomplished it. We came together and we talked through things, and we came up with a plan that worked for us, and it accomplished Dad's goals. His goals when we asked him was that we would always all talk. He didn't want to have any hardships in the family where we wouldn't communicate, and that the farm would stay in the family. And his goals were what drove us to do what we did. That was the goal then. That was what we wanted to accomplish, because that was meeting his, desire for the farm. We also worked together through a health crisis. We did not see it coming. When we moved back to the farm, he did end up with dementia. He would not get help. And as, many farmers do, it's a challenge to have to admit we have that problem, and we had to get mobile crisis there one day to get him help. So I say that because I want everybody to know there's a mobile crisis unit in every county, and at the end of the day, everybody felt it went as well as it could have went. We got him help, we got him the proper medication. He did have to spend the last 3 months of his life in a nursing facility in an Alzheimer's or dementia unit. But they were great there, and they worked with him well. But, we worked through all those crises too. And then distributing family heirlooms, we did not have any fights. My sister knew of a way. She wrote everything down in the house. We literally ranked what we wanted, and our kids ranked under us. So there was 3 siblings. And we literally took this list, and any of the conflicts, we had small discussions. And we literally ended up with a list that I could work through once it was time to do that, when Dad had passed, and just say to everybody, here's your item you wanted, here's your item you wanted. And that's how we distributed them. And so often I hear so many stories about families getting hung up over a yellow plate or a corner cupboard or something. And it really doesn't have to be that way. There are ways to work through that stuff. So I just encourage you to do that kind of thing and to know that, again, if we could do it and we could work through it, anybody can. And I'll also say, I know I hear stories about, and we yell, but there's stories about people who yell all the time and that's how they communicate. I think there's a lot of work to do there. I think that's something you really ought to work on. If that's the way you communicate all the time, is to try to work through that. We will have times, like I said, we have farm meetings where we have used Kleenex because people were crying. We've gone through all kinds of things, but we've worked through it, to me, in a calm fashion and in a good way, and we made positive progress through each one. So it's not always easy, but I don't think yelling and stomping away and that kind of thing, you're going to get anywhere with that type of action either. I always like to tell people, there's kind of an old saying, and I'll get to it, respect those who've gone before you, but don't allow the ghost scripts to manage the farm. And ghost scripts are a term that we use when maybe you have a farm there and the people 2 generations ago, you're still letting them manage the farm because you refuse to give up a certain thing that they did, a certain way they did it. And in today's world, the way technology, where everything progresses, we know change has to be made. And I just use this picture because in one situation, I know when my mom planted 8-inch bushes in front of our house, she never envisioned what they ended up being. And I ripped them out and I didn't have any problem with that because she was always very positive about things needed change. Now, the day we took the trees down in front of the house, the electric company did because there was problems with them. A neighbor even stopped and questioned the people taking the trees down. Now, that bothered me, but you know, I'm just saying you have to make changes that need made for safety, for many reasons, for economic reasons. You can't live and let the farm stay, I want to say, in the 40s or whatever. Sometimes change has to be made. It can be detrimental to the viability. So don't be afraid to do that. And I would say, please don't expect your next gen to do that. I know my next gen's changing things, and I'm fine with that. I have to be fine with that, and I need to work through some of that too. Suggestions from us, and like I said, we are not perfect, and we have a lot we're still working through, is learn to work together, learn to laugh. I think that's incredibly important. And I would say forgive more than you laugh, and find what works and do it. With scheduling, I mentioned, we ended up with a whiteboard calendar on our basement wall so that the month's schedule can be put out there. It's farm, it's personal, it's, you know, workers on the farm, when are they going to be there, when are they not going to be there, kind of thing. If you think you're over communicating, it's actually probably about right. That came from my daughter, and that's her advice to farmers, that, you know, she felt like she was communicating plenty, but found out she had to communicate even more for everything to go smoothly. And again, I think I already preached on this. Select a high quality ag attorney, ag professionals in general. It's very important that everyone you have involved in your farm transition planning be experienced, and don't be afraid to walk away from a bad choice like I said we had to do with one professional. And it does take a team. I agree with Phil. You need, you know, accounting, financial professionals, you need legal professionals, you may need meeting facilitators if you can't start the conversations yourself. But I would say don't be afraid to start the conversation. At the starting point is probably the most difficult piece, but it's also very important. I want to thank everyone again for coming to the Farm Succession Workshop today. I hope you've gained many good facts and lots of information from the workshop. And if we can be of further assistance, we would certainly like to do so. Pennsylvania Farm Link seeks to help you to move forward with your succession planning by providing facilitation services and referrals to other ag professionals, for business consulting, for legal aspects of succession planning, and any other way we can be of help. So please don't be afraid to reach out and contact us for your needs, and we are thankful again that you have chosen to participate today. Thank you very much. Have a good day.